Welcome to And How Does That Make You Feel? My name is Stori. Oh, baby, do we have a lot to talk about today? I'm sorry, I had to. I had to make the pun. I'm so excited to have my guest here because for the last couple of months, I've been so inspired to speak about the entire birthing process from planning to be pregnant to being pregnant to post pregnancy. And for a lot of you all, a lot of you might be pregnant right now, planning to be pregnant, have just given birth, or in community with people who are pregnant, planning to be pregnant, or have just given birth as well. And I think that this guest has so many different resources and knowledge to share with us and to help us to be better community members when it comes to supporting those who are on the path to being new parents. Today, we have a very special guest. She goes by the name Iris Danielle. She is an international board certified lactation consultant hailing from the great city of Black Mountain, North Carolina. She has a background in education and psychology and human services with a Master of Arts. She's began her journey in birth work shortly after giving birth to her second child by becoming a postpartum doula, followed by becoming a birth doula, childbirth educator, and breastfeeding peer counselor. In 2020, she entered into the inaugural Pathway to Human Lactation program at North Carolina A&T University, where she obtained her certificate for human lactation. She then went on to become a board-certified lactation consultant and has been practicing as an IBCLC in both hospitals and community settings. She is also the founder of Prenatal Support Center. Iris strives to provide equitable access to quality care for underrepresented and underserved populations. I'm so excited to speak to Iris. I know you all are going to gain so much insight on not only lactation, but what lactation consultants do, how they can support those who are birthing, the whole process of, is it okay to have caffeine while you're breastfeeding? What can help with milk supply? Is it okay to put breast milk in your skincare? We're going to find all of that out with Iris today. So let's dive in. Iris, welcome to the And How Does That Make You Feel podcast. I hope you're not too nervous. I know this is your first podcast recording, but I'm so excited to have you because, as I said in the intro, I have had such an interest in speaking about the entire journey of pregnancy, not just the pregnancy or a little bit after, right? The postpartum part, but also the pre-planning. And there's so many different aspects of the journey for people who are giving birth and for their community. It should be a community thing to help those who have just brought in new life. And as a board certified lactation consultant, which that's amazing, I am so excited to hear what you have to say. So welcome. I'm so excited to have you. So tell us, where do babies come from? I'm just kidding.
That's okay.
No, when I first asked my parents where babies came from, my mom told me they came from a tree. She said parents go to this big tree and they pick out the baby they want. And I felt so special. But then my mindset was, but why? Why me? Why did
Exactly.
you choose me?
Yeah.
Did you ever?
Or like what type of tree?
What type
Yeah.
was it an oak tree? Was it an evergreen? Like what are we talking about? Did you ever have a story like that where you asked your parents?
Well, not so much with my parents, but with my children, yes. So they are very much curious about the work that I do. And so I did a lot of doula work before becoming a lactation consultant. And so they really think that babies come out of their belly button. And I'm like, that's not true, but they know what a uterus is. And I'm like, how do you know what a uterus is? Do you think that it comes out of a belly button? So, yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yep.
Another thing I also like to ask people too, I won't ask you, but is when did you find out? Well, if you're a parent, please don't listen to this part. If your kids still believe in Santa Claus, I'm sorry. Okay, don't listen.
Right.
But I also like to ask people, what age did you learn Santa Claus wasn't real? And then how did you react? Because I feel like it really gives insight into how people were as kids.
Absolutely. And it gives insight to how they view things as adults, too. So I think I was around the age of 8 whenever I found out that Santa wasn't real.
That's a good
And
age.
I wasn't completely crushed, to be honest. I just kind of organically found out, if that makes sense.
Mm,
And so now my 10-year-old, he still believes in it, but I think that he just believes in it for his little siblings.
okay,
So I think he's
that's
kind of
nice.
on the same track. So it's good.
Well, then that's I think that makes me very caring,
Mhm.
very compassionate. Like, I'm
Mhm.
not gonna ruin the fun for others.
Right.
Just let them have their nice moment. It's not hurting anyone. Oh,
Exactly.
that's so
Yeah.
fun.
Even the tooth fairy too. Yeah.
The tooth fairy, that was I don't even know how I found out the tooth fairy wasn't real. I did miss the money though. Once my parents
Yeah.
stopped that, I was like, "Man, should have
It's
kept that
like I don't
going."
want to admit that I know.
Like,
Yeah.
shoot. So funny. If you also have a funny story about
Mhm.
how you found out that Santa Claus wasn't real, please do put it in the comments.
Mhm.
So, really though, I want to know more about your story. So, how did
Absolutely.
Iris get here? Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to here?
For sure. And I'll try my best not to be long winded.
It's okay.
But how I became an international board certified lactation consultant was a long journey. I got pregnant at the age of 19 with my first child, and he changed my life completely and my views. I was actually a sophomore in college at Lenore Ryan University, and I had met my husband now. He was a basketball player at Lincoln Memorial University. And so we just kind of met and hit it off, and um, just things moved very quickly. And we got married, had our first child, and I remember during the time that I was in the hospital, I remember looking back at my hospital room and being like, I want to work in a hospital one day. I'm
Mm,
going to work in a hospital one day. I don't know how, but I'm going to make it. So then I just continued on with my education. I had a second child, um, 3.5 years later, a little girl. And when I was pregnant with her, I got my bachelor's degree in psychology and human services. And then after that, I got my postpartum doula certification
mm,
because it's funny, I was actually gifted postpartum doula services. I had no clue what that was. And so I decided to get my certification to be a postpartum doula. And so that's what piqued my interest to become a doula and start in birth work. And so then after that, I started as a birth doula too and a childbirth educator. And I was like, oh my gosh, I really want to do something more clinical. I don't know how to do this. So I just continued on and I got my master's degree in human services. And I
mm.
was like, I still want to do something more clinical.
Yeah.
So this was around like 2019, 2020. And luckily in 2020, North Carolina A&T came out with a new program called Pathway to Human Lactation. It's the
Mm.
Pathway 2 program to become a board certified lactation consultant. And I was in the inaugural cohort for them. And so myself and 10 others, so there was a class of 11, and it's a 1 year program, and then you get your certification and you have to do all these clinical hours and going through hospitals, community
Mm.
clinics, things like that. And so that's how I became an IBCLC. And then I took my exam in 2021, and then I became certified in 2022. So I've been practicing for 2 years, and I've been practicing in the hospital setting, community setting, just various, even in home settings as well. So I still do a little bit of doula work, but mainly lactation work.
So you said you were gifted
Yes,
postpartum doula services.
I was.
Was there anything in that, I guess, experience that you were like, wow, this is so beneficial for me? I
Yeah,
have to participate in this.
for sure. So I didn't realize that there were services like this.
Mhm.
I just thought that there were like babysitters, things
Mm.
like that. And one of my friends, she was like, "What do you need?" And I was like, "Honestly, I don't know what I need. I'm a fresh mom of two. I'm young. I'm in college. I don't know what I need." And so she was like, "Well, do you have all of the clothes and all of the necessities for the baby?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course."
Mm.
And then she just surprised me, and it came in this little gift certificate. and I will never forget it. And it was from or through the company, the labor ladies at the time. And so I finished the services and like rendered the services or whatever with my postpartum doula. And then she invited me to a support group. And I was like, oh my gosh, more women need to know about this. I was like, how
Mm.
do I get involved in this? They were like, well, we're going to have a training soon. And so that's how I started.
I love what you said about, like, I don't even know what I need.
Right.
A lot of people don't know what they
Because how
need.
do we know what we need if,
Mhm.
society is just telling us that we just need to have a baby and be completely okay and just move on
I've
and bounce back?
and yeah,
Yeah.
oh, the bounce back.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous,
It
but I
absolutely.
often feel, and that's again why I wanted to have you and other experts who are in maternal health come in, because you have the baby
Mhm.
and then you fend for yourself.
Then you fend for yourself and it's like you're taking care of your baby, but who's taking care of you?
Mm.
And I feel like I see that more so now. Um, Even like 10 years ago, it was so hush hush. But now it's becoming more normalized for people to speak up and be like, hey, actually, I do need help.
Mm.
Actually, I don't have everything I need, or maybe I am feeling a little bit blue. What are the resources that you have? And that's one of my biggest goals is to make sure that birthing people understand that it's okay to ask for resources, it's okay to ask for help. We don't all have to do this alone. And I'm really big on building community and making sure that people feel heard.
Speaking about it,
Mm-hmm.
having the voices heard,
Mm-hmm.
becoming aware of things,
Exactly. Awareness.
because so many different people have different journeys as
They
well.
do.
So your experience may be completely different than theirs, but then
Mm-hmm.
that person could give you insight into what your experience is like. I don't even know what's
Absolutely.
going on with me.
Yeah.
So with your role as a lactation consultant, can you go in a bit more detail about what that means?
For sure. So, a lactation consultant is a little bit more clinical than my doula work. So, we go in and we help birthing people learn how to feed their infants appropriately. And so, yes, we still help with formula feeding because there is a correct way to fix it and prepare it. There's
Mm.
a correct way to do to actually bottle feed called paste bottle feeding. Um, and then, of course, we help with the lactation side of things, of like nursing your baby. And some people call it chest feeding too.
Mhm.
So I try to make sure that we're being inclusive. Um, but we help with latching and we help with bonding. We help with making sure that the infant is gaining weight appropriately. We, like I said, we can work in a hospital setting, a community setting, but in the hospital, it's very much like those first latches, first feedings, and just ensuring that everything is going appropriately and that the baby is growing appropriately as well. And so in the community clinic, like in WIC clinics, it's kind of the same thing, but you would get more into like issuing breast pumps
Mhm.
and seeing if they have latch issues. And it would just be when the baby is a little bit older.
So how long so is the lactation consultant pretty much there for like a day to assist, or do you have people reaching out to a lactation consultant throughout the time that they are chest feeding or breastfeeding or
Mhm.
just formula feeding?
So I like to say, as a general rule, we see infants up to the age of 1
Okay.
is like my general age range, but even up to 2 because sometimes there are still infant feeding um, obstacles that people are going through, even up through the age of 2. So then we would look at things like weaning, introducing the child to solids, and of course, growth and development as well. So it's very much just like you were explaining earlier, how experiences are tailored to certain people.
Mhm.
That's the same when you're thinking about mother infant dyads. Every case is individual. And so you have to make sure that you are getting not only the history, but um, getting what their goals are and meeting those goals and tailoring those needs to them.
So where so is it a free resource that people can have? Like, are you coming in when the person is giving birth, or is this like an outside hire? Like, where can people find a lactation consultant?
So it can be a free resource,
Okay.
and then it can, of course, be like a paid resource as well. So the free resources are, of course, going to be like through the community resources like WIC and the Department of Health and Human Services. So programs like that. There are also groups that do sliding scale depending on your insurance. So it really just depends on where you're at in the socioeconomic status that you're in.
Mhm.
Um, but I also like to break that barrier of, again, asking for help. So if you know that you're going to a certain lactation consultant and she's charging X amount of money, don't be afraid to ask, like, hey, I'm on such and such insurance. Do you think that that would be something that you take? And of course, they would have that like on the website too.
Mhm.
But it never hurts to ask. But I also have a list of resources for like sliding scale pay, free resources, support groups that I can share with you.
Of course,
And
you could put
that's
it
all
all
in the
in.
state of North Carolina.
Oh, that would be
Yes.
amazing. I'll definitely share that with the audience because when I was doing my own little research about lactation
Hmm.
consultant, I was like, okay, first and foremost, I don't think it's a resource that I've ever heard of
Hmm.
until recently.
And a lot of people haven't.
And I'm thinking, okay, well, when do they come in? Do they
Hmm.
come in once you're still pregnant? Is it after?
Yeah.
How long can I stay with this person?
Hmm.
Is this a free resource? Is it
Right.
something that I can just go out and, hire someone personally to
Mhm.
help me through that? But going back to that question, when is the right time for that consultant to come in during your journey?
So to answer your first question of when they come in,
Mhm.
honestly, it can be all of the above. But ideally, you want to get the lactation professional involved in the prenatal setting because those educational um, tips that they have will sink in a lot better in the prenatal period than it will in the birth and postpartum period
Okay.
because it's a proven fact that birthing people um, do not have a really good recollection of things that are taught to them or said to them in that fresh postpartum period,
Mhm.
just because of all the hormone surges. And so, getting that education in the prenatal period is something that the birth world and lactation consultants around me have been pushing for. And so, there's a lot more free resources for the prenatal setting now than there were.
I love that. And I think that's, again, goes to the awareness piece and the accessibility piece because
Hmm.
there are, you're very dedicated to serving those who are underrepresented and
Yeah.
underserved. So
Yeah.
those things that are accessible to people of all socioeconomic backgrounds is
Mhm.
so important. What would you say are the pain points that, birthing people, women who are giving birth, parents are experiencing that a lactation consultant can help them with?
Absolutely. So there are many challenges that a family can face when it comes to infant feeding. So, of course, there's latch issues. Also, whenever you're looking at different demographics, there's things like stigma of like, hey, my mom and my grandma, they didn't breastfeed and that's not normal to them. So you have to break down that stigma. So
Mhm.
that's something that we even help with too. And then, of course, just making sure that you have enough milk supply. Milk supply is a huge thing. I know you probably see all over like Instagram and Facebook, like,
Yeah, the lactation cookies, I
yes, the
believe.
lactation cookies,
Uh-huh.
and somebody has 100 ounces of milk or 1,000 ounces of milk in their freezer. So, and I always like to tell my patients that you don't need to compare yourself when it comes to milk supply because that's very individualistic
Mm.
to you in your lifestyle and how you're feeding and how much you're stimulating. And so just making sure that they know and understand that there are such things as undersupply and oversupply, and just making sure that we're hitting like their goals and being right in that middle road, because one extreme and the other can be problematic.
And I definitely also going back to what you said about that you don't only just help with the chest feeding part, but
Yeah,
also for formula feeding.
yeah.
And so there is often this pressure that a lot of people feel of, well, I have to breastfeed.
Mm-hmm.
It's the best thing. I have to do it. If I don't do it, I'm failing. Or maybe they do start breastfeeding, but it's a
Yeah,
bit hard just on the
absolutely.
body. What would your advice be for those people who are feeling a bit of pressure to breastfeed?
So, first and foremost, yes, breast milk is all the things
Hmm.
beneficial for both mom and baby. But we have to take into account the society that we live in and the stressors that we have, especially as women and especially as women of color in this current societal um, realm that we're in. And so, my motto is fed is best, and not every lactation consultant is going to agree with me on that, and that's okay. But as long as you're feeding your baby appropriately with the correct kind of formula or breast milk, I'm good.
Hmm.
I'm good. Because at the end of the day, your baby is still doing okay. You're still doing okay. And there's always reasons behind people not being able to breastfeed or not wanting to breastfeed. Think about some of the traumas that a mother may have gone through, or just the stress. Maybe she has to go back to work before the 6 week mark. That does happen. And so making sure that we're not passing that stigma onto them, because as long as your baby is fed, I just want to help you feed your baby. And I literally tell my patients that all the time. I'm like, I'm just here to help you feed your baby. What's your
Yeah.
plan?
Oh, I love
Yeah.
that. Just a healthy fed baby.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it.
You said something about the struggles of women of color.
Hmm.
Could you talk a little bit more about the differences there?
The difference between like a woman of color and versus our counterparts.
Mhm.
Yes,
Mhm.
absolutely. Just in regards to breastfeeding or just the
Breastfeeding,
stigma.
maternal health, stigmas.
So it's definitely no secret that women of color have a higher mortality rate when it
Mhm.
comes to the birthing process. And so, one of the things that the Pathway to program at A&T taught us is just how to educate and advocate for ourselves, um, because women of color are not being heard in the healthcare setting. And so, my role in that is a huge advocacy piece as the lactation consultant, because I can't tell you how many times I walked into a room, been helping someone, and the nurse will be like, "Oh, she's just formula feeding." I'm like,
Mm.
"Oh, interesting. Where'd you get that from?" Because I was just helping her latch, but okay.
Wow.
So it's like you really have to sit back, and I like to just reevaluate the whole setting of the consult that I'm having and be like, okay, what are your goals? And I'm going to help you reach your goals, whether that's formula feeding, breastfeeding, or in between. If you need to do both, let's do both. But just making sure that their providers know and hear them,
Mhm.
their true choices, and they're not just making the choice for them.
And even helping them if they decide to make that switch.
Exactly.
Like, okay, I thought I wanted to do formula feeding, but now I think I want to give chest feeding a shot,
Yeah.
or vice versa.
Yeah.
Or, like you said, a mix of both.
Which is okay. Which
Fed
is
baby.
absolutely okay. And I think just not passing that judgmental piece of like, oh, well, this person is a certain like demographic, social demographic, so they're not
Mhm.
going to breastfeed, or they're not going to formula feed, or their family's going to um, convince them to do otherwise. And it's like, okay, yeah, that may have been the case in the last room, but we're in a curtain room where you need to read the room.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think for me, just being that advocate and making sure that these women are feeling heard and that they're getting the most proper and safe care that they deserve.
And I'm also thinking about just back to the awareness piece, what the options are.
Mhm.
Some people don't know their options. For example, now it's becoming even more of a thing of, oh, you can pump.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to just latch the baby on. There's
Mhm.
pumping, there's like you said, a mix between. As silly as it may sound,
Mhm.
there could definitely be people who aren't very aware of
Mhm.
just how many options they have to reach their goal, like you were saying, that
Right.
goal piece. Well, going to lactation itself,
Mhm.
what are the benefits of breastfeeding or, giving the child your breast milk?
Right.
Benefits for the baby and even maybe for the person who's doing the breastfeeding.
So, looking at the benefits from the infant perspective,
Mhm.
of course, lower instances of things like diabetes and certain childhood cancers, asthma, ear infections, tooth health. Um, so, a lot of times, breastfed babies, it's been proven, have less of a chance of getting a cavity. So, all of those are health benefits. And then for the mother, it lowers the percentage of having things or experiencing things like postpartum depression, because one of the hormones that's released whenever a mother is nursing her infant is one of those feel good hormones, oxytocin. And so, whenever that is released, they have that feel good feeling and they're getting those like emotional highs that they need to balance out their lowering
Mhm.
um, levels of other hormones. And so they have a lower chance of experiencing some of those postpartum mood disorders. And then, of course, the bonding experience is just something that's irreplaceable. And also, health benefits for the mom are kind of the same as with the infant. So, lower risk of certain cancers, and it helps your uterus shrink back to the correct size. So whenever a baby latches, your uterus actually starts to contract. And so a lot of times, whenever a mom has had multiple children, she feels that more intensely. And
Oh,
so
wow.
whenever I see her latch and she's like, I'm
Mm.
like, that's actually a good thing. I know it doesn't feel good, but you want your uterus to go back to its normal size
Mm.
as soon as possible. And that's what breastfeeding helps do. So the benefits are endless for both mom and baby.
So the uterus going back to its size,
Mhm.
I guess it will naturally contract, but with the breastfeeding, it will speed it up a bit. Is that
Mhm.
okay?
Correct. So it helps again, it's a hormonal thing.
Mhm.
And so when a certain hormone is released whenever you're breastfeeding, it helps the uterus contract and then that helps it to shrink back to its normal size, which also helps to lower the risk of hemorrhaging because whenever the
Mm.
uterus is not shrinking back to its size appropriately, of course, hemorrhaging can happen. And of course, we've heard all of that in the news of like women hemorrhaging after birth. So again, it's a beautiful thing and it's very beneficial on both sides. But it needs to be the right um, scenario for both infant and mom.
Okay.
Yep.
I didn't know about the contracting part. See, I'm learning. And that's why again, I feel like even if you're not pregnant or you're not planning to be pregnant, a lot of this information can be used for your community, just the people you're in community with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, let me have this knowledge. So if I do, my homegirl gets pregnant,
Hmm.
I have this information to share with her.
Yeah.
Because I think pregnancy, the entire journey, the mom is incredibly important, the parent is incredibly important,
Yeah.
and it should be a community thing.
Yes, it should be a community thing and just making sure that we're giving them the options that they need,
Mhm.
and just knowing that they have a choice in their journey.
So I heard something. I heard that also when a baby is sick, the
Mm-hmm.
breast milk can change. Is that true?
That is absolutely true.
Okay.
So I cannot tell you how many times I've had one of my other children get sick, and the baby that I'm breastfeeding, so I have three children, and the baby that I'm breastfeeding is just completely fine, like no symptoms, no nothing. So it absolutely does work. Now, does it work like a magical thing every single time? No, but
Mhm.
it is something that helps the baby's immunity because there are some um, microbial properties that are in milk, in human milk. And so that's what helps the baby create that immunity to where even if they do get sick, sometimes it's a lot less severe than what it would be otherwise.
Amazing. Like it's a little
Yeah.
vaccine.
Yeah, basically. It's liquid gold. That's what it
Well,
is.
how do you feel about adults drinking breast milk and putting it in their skincare and
Honestly, like my professor or my program director at ANC always said, do what's best at your address.
Mhm.
If that's what helps you, absolutely. I've personally tried my own breast milk and I would do it over and over again. It's fine. I
Yeah,
really just am trying to, like, one of my biggest goals is just to try to normalize that human milk is not icky. It's not
right.
nasty. Like, this is a natural thing. Even my oldest son now, he likes to joke and be like, "Oh, I didn't drink breast milk." I'm like, "Sir, you breastfed for 2.5 years.
Oh yeah, no, so yeah,
So
he
you can
knows.
sit down somewhere." So, yes.
Oh, I always, I thought the breast milk and like the soap bars and stuff, it was
Yeah.
pretty cool, especially with like little babies as
And they
well.
have like even
Hmm.
these breast milk jewelry pieces that are just so
Oh.
beautiful. Um, Very special.
And also too, I love how people can well, let me ask you this.
Hmm.
Is it do you like the practice of women donating their breast milk
Oh,
to feed other
absolutely.
okay, yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of times in the hospital setting, it's very regulated. And so sometimes the donor milk that you're getting is not 100% like the breast milk. Sometimes it's mixed with like fortifiers and such. But absolutely, I 110% support it because I feel like every baby should have the option to be given breast milk if that's what's right for the mom and that's what she chooses.
Do you think that breast milk versus formula,
Hmm.
I guess there's also this myth that formula makes chunky babies, but I've seen chunky breastfed babies. So,
So after this is all over, I'm going to show you my babies.
okay.
They were all chunky,
Super chunky.
so super chunky. So I've actually seen the opposite, where babies with that have been formula fed have been pretty little. So, I
Mhm.
mean, it really just depends on the genetic makeup of the baby and the
Right.
lifestyle, and are they being overfed? So there's just so many characteristics that go into that.
Right, yeah. I think it's all about just the baby.
Yeah,
Is the baby meant to be chunky?
yeah. But all of my breastfed babies were chunks.
Blessed. That's
Yes.
something I am crossing my
I
fingers. I want
love
chunky
chunky
babies.
babies.
I really want a chunky baby.
Yes, they're so sweet.
Yeah, but of course I love my baby no matter what the
Yes,
size.
absolutely.
So let's get into the drawbacks.
Mhm.
So I know for myself, one of the things that I fear about breastfeeding is number one, the pain,
Mhm.
the biting,
Okay.
and I guess like the clogged ducts. So like mastitis or I believe
Mastitis?
mastitis,
Yes.
right? Um, we could go one by one,
Yeah.
but let's talk about some of those fears that I have.
Yes. So I do want to validate your fears.
Mm.
They are very much real, and those are things that do happen. So I'm not going to say like breastfeeding is a magical thing that is just seamless all the time. But the first thing that you mentioned was that you're afraid of it hurting.
Mm.
So first and foremost, breastfeeding is not supposed to hurt. And so there are so many people that will just go and trudge through it, and that's not what it's supposed to be.
Mm.
I did that with my first baby and I was like, okay, something just this can't be right. And then second, you said biting.
Mm.
So whenever the baby starts getting teeth, sometimes biting is a thing, but it's just really important to try to minimize your reaction because that's whenever they will start to bite more and more because they think it's funny.
Oh yeah.
Um, but usually it's just a
Mm.
phase and you can work through it. And then your third was the clogged ducts. So that can definitely happen. And mastitis, of course, is a breast infection that happens from clogged ducts and engorgement that goes untreated. Um, but the biggest thing is making sure that we're emptying our breasts every 2 to 3 hours around the clock. That's the ideal. So feeding a baby 8 to 12 times in a 24-hour period, or that every 2 to 3 hours, is so important. And you start to get clogged ducts and engorgement whenever you're not frequently removing that milk. So if the baby's not going directly to the breast, then then you need to be pumping or hand expressing, just something to get that milk out to help prevent things such as clogged ducts and engorgement.
What sort of pain did you experience with your first child when it came to breastfeeding? Like what, because I didn't know this is not supposed to hurt,
No,
but you
it's
hear so
not.
much about, like, I guess the dry nipples, and then
Mhm.
of course the contraction, and then so like what pains were you experiencing?
So I was experiencing a pinchy pain,
Mm,
and now looking back at it 10 years ago, it was very much a positional thing. It wasn't
okay.
really like anything that was wrong with like his mouth or anything. But my second baby had a lip and a tongue tie that I did not get revised. And so hers was even worse. And that was just, it was a lot. So now looking back, I would have definitely liked to see if a revision would have helped. And then with my third baby, he just had a lip tie, but not a tongue tie. So we were able to work through it a lot more seamlessly than my second baby.
I didn't know that could cause the pain in
Hmm.
breastfeeding.
Absolutely.
So lip tie, and you said tongue tie,
Yep.
and then positioning as
Yep.
well. And a lactation consultant could be the one to say, "Oh, I know what's wrong here. Let's remedy this."
Right. And so we're not technically able to diagnose,
Okay.
but we can say, hey, there's limited mobility up underneath the tongue, or whenever the baby is latching at their lip, it looks like there's some tightness there. So then we
Mhm.
would refer them to a pediatric dentist or another provider, sometimes an ENT, and either they choose to look at the functionality of it, or they choose, or the parents can choose a revision, and they just do um, the pros and cons of both. So really just making sure that they're getting that full oral assessment in the hospital is very, very imminent.
And then with formula feeding,
Hmm.
are you able to see some of the same things?
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely. So just because they're formula feeding does not mean that a lip and tongue tie are not there.
Mhm.
And so a lip and tongue tie can affect how an infant latches onto a bottle just as much as a breast.
Mhm.
So an oral assessment in both cases. I say an oral assessment is something that should be done before they leave the hospital.
Before they leave, yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I could only imagine bringing a baby home
Hmm.
and them being fussy, or maybe
Yeah.
they're not eating, and you're just like, "What's going on?
Yeah.
Like, what's happening?" More stress. I mean, you're fresh out
Hmm.
the hospital.
Yeah.
You think you're a bad parent,
Yeah.
and you're teaching me a lot, because I'm like, yeah, a lactation consultant can really reduce the stress in a lot of
Yeah.
situations
Yep.
and bring awareness. And so, going to the clogged ducts,
Hmm.
and more questions around lactation.
Hmm.
Um, what are some of the remedies or the solutions that you would recommend to your patient?
Hmm.
Say that they want to produce more milk, for
Hmm.
instance. Like, do the lactation cookies work?
So that's a little bit controversial.
Okay. We don't have to get into the
No, no, no,
controversial.
no, no.
Okay.
I mean, I for one, I mean, I make my own lactation cookies out of some nut butters and oats and things like that. So there is proven science behind certain things called galactagogues. That's what we call it in the lactation world, that help to increase. But it really is, it depends on the individual. But nothing is going to help increase your milk more than stimulation.
Okay.
So if you're not stimulating every 2 to 3 hours, you can eat all of the lactation bars in the world, and your milk supply could very well stay the same.
Hmm. I'm assuming here
Hmm.
there are people who, I don't want to be like a Debbie Downer, but are there people who are just like, I can't produce enough milk
Yeah.
and I must switch to formula feeding?
There are people that have Naturally low milk supplies. And I will say the size of your breast does not determine your milk supply. You can have small breasts and have an abundance of milk,
Mhm.
and vice versa. Um, but just because, yes, looking at the milk supply, of course, that can happen. Low milk supply and an oversupply can happen. So, a lot of times when we're looking at oversupply, that's when we're starting to think of things like clogged ducts, mastitis. And so that frequent removal, but also not overstimulating our breasts. So sometimes I'll have parents that are like in the NICU and they're just wanting to make more and more and more milk. So they're pumping like every hour. And I'm like, no, we can't do that.
Yeah.
Pumping every hour may be appropriate in some cases, but that's very specific. And so overstimulation is a thing, just like understimulation is a thing.
A good balance.
Absolutely.
Okay. So another thing,
Mm-hmm.
the nipples
Mm-hmm.
getting a bit dry
Mm-hmm.
and cracked. How much of an issue is that?
So our first line of defense is going to be to hand express some colostrum, which colostrum is the first milk. And we actually make our first milk during pregnancy, not when baby comes out. So
Okay.
sometimes people will experience leaking in pregnancy. That's completely normal. But using that colostrum as a healing agent is super important because that's what it's there for. It has those antimicrobial properties to help to heal the nipple. And then we start to look into things like comfort gels, which are just hydroglycerin or glycerin gels that are placed on the nipple to help encourage that wet healing. Some people will go back to the evidence of from years ago of just letting their nipples air dry. And then we have things like lanolin and coconut oil,
Mhm.
different type of like seed oils that people will use. I try to steer clear of the oils and I try to just make sure that we're trying the colostrum and maybe the hydrogels first, just because they're more natural remedies. And then some people use things even like lanolin, but it really is just personal preference and how that lactation consultant practices.
So the first milk,
Mhm.
when does that start?
So that actually starts about midway through your pregnancy.
Midway. Okay.
Yes. So they say around like 16 to 24 or 18 to 24 weeks. So about the midway mark of your pregnancy is when that first milk is made. You're not necessarily going to see leaking at that point, but and some people don't see leaking at all in pregnancy and they
Yeah.
have a perfect milk supply. So I don't want to make people think that, oh gosh, if I'm not leaking, then I'm not going to make anything.
Mhm.
That's very much not the case. So yes, it's made before you even have your baby.
And that first line of defense, is that you taking the milk and then keeping it to hydrate or
So hand expressing, so getting those drops of colostrum and rubbing it into the nipple. So literally
okay.
expressing those drops
Mhm.
and then using it as a healing agent. And then maybe even getting some into a syringe so you can just continuously do it so you don't have to hand express every time, or just using a little bit of breast milk even throughout your breastfeeding journey, not just colostrum, can help.
And the hand expressing is just you using your hand to got
Exactly.
you.
Yes. And there's a whole pattern to it, but I like to remember pressing back into the chest wall, compressing together, and release. So we always say to make like a backward C around your breast, or I'm sorry, around your areola, and think of it like a clock, and then working all the way around.
Okay. Well, when I get there, I'll have a
I got you.
consultant. Yeah.
I got you. Yeah.
You're just gonna teach me again.
Yes, absolutely.
Uh, okay. So I'm like, okay, hand expressing and then
Mhm.
using that to hydrate. I've also seen people say like cabbage or lettuce.
So cabbage is going to do the opposite. So it
Oh,
has
okay.
healing
Mhm.
properties, but people use that to dry up milk. So they use that whenever they're doing like the weaning process to speed that up, adding that into like a tight fitting bra. So that's what helps to constrict that milk production.
Why would someone want to do that?
So if someone wants to do it like suddenly, say that they're experiencing a sickness or personal preference, or maybe they have like a surgery or something coming up, or the weaning process,
Mhm.
then they may want to use the cabbage leaves to speed up the process of weaning and to stop producing milk. And then
Okay.
adding in those constrictive clothing like tight fitting bra,
Mhm.
things like that. And then, of course, you want to do the opposite for a healthy milk supply. So you don't want to wear tight fitting bras for a healthy milk supply, and you want to not use cabbage leaves, obviously.
Mhm.
And then there are certain medications that sometimes we talk about the benefits of drying up milk too.
That is wild because I never thought about the opposite of
Yeah.
I want to now stop
Yeah.
the milk production.
And so that's what a lactation consultant does. Like we literally walk the parents through the whole infant feeding process from prenatal to weaning. So that can be as long as 3 years, 2 years,
Mm.
a month, however long. But it very much is a journey that should and can start in the prenatal setting.
Does so when you stop breastfeeding or you
Mhm.
decide I want to wean the baby off,
Mhm.
do you need to do some of that things to stop the milk or will the milk just stop producing itself?
So it really just depends in like what stage you're in. So with all with my past two babies, we just naturally weaned and it was just a very beautiful like just slowly weaning down to where my milk supply had just pretty much dwindled out.
Mm.
I'm in that process now with my last baby, which is making me so emotional. He's
Oh.
about to be 2 in 2 weeks. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, how are we here?
Mhm.
But of course, like I mentioned before, sometimes there are cases where parents need to stop um, almost immediately. And so
Okay.
that's whenever we start thinking about like the drying agents and making sure that we're doing it safely because we don't want to get mastitis. So you still have to
Mhm.
remove the milk. And that's in the hospital setting, especially working in the NICU. We see that where a parent has chosen not to breastfeed or provide breast milk for their baby for whatever reason, and they just stop cold turkey. And we're like, okay, we can't do that.
Yeah.
We have to wean down. So if we're like pumping 8 times a day, let's bring it down to a little bit less until like we're working down to no pump sessions or 1 to 2 pump sessions a day.
Mm.
So you really have to do it gradually to make sure that you're doing it safely and not getting things like engorgement and mastitis.
That makes
Yeah.
sense. Especially the immediately part. I can see situations where that
Yeah.
would have to happen even for like a mentally,
Yeah.
if the baby's no longer there.
hmm We see that all the time.
Yeah.
So we have a whole process of what to do with lactation after loss. Some people, some parents will choose to donate the breast milk. Some will choose to still express it and, store it for, another reason. And some people just don't want to make the milk at all. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And we really just have to meet them where they are and give them their options and not just assume that, hey, because this happened, then this is going to be what they want.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Wow. Yeah, you all do it all.
Yeah, we do a
All for
lot.
the whole thing.
Yeah.
But even those really difficult moments
Yeah.
for parents. So going back to when you were talking about when you're breastfeeding, you don't
Mhm.
want to wear too constrictive things.
Mhm.
What are some other things that are a bit off limits? Like, are there any foods that we shouldn't be eating or?
Um, so there are a few things. So the constrictive clothing is one of the biggest things. And then the next thing would be looking at minty things. So like mint teas and
Mm,
minty oils, peppermint, like whatever flavor. Peppermint helps in drying the milk. And so trying to steer clear of those. And then looking into things that promote a healthy milk production, which is going to be mostly a healthy diet, a well-rounded diet, and making sure that you're really hydrated. And a lot of people swear by like body armor and
mm.
all these things. But I'm just here to say that a really well-rounded like whole food diet is super important, but just making sure that you're drinking plenty of water.
Okay, hydration.
Yes, hydration is huge.
Are there so like with drinking alcohol?
Mhm.
People can drink alcohol, just maybe wait a few hours or
Yes. And so we have rules on this. If you're too drunk to drive, then you're too drunk to
breastfeed.
breastfeed.
Mhm.
And really, it's more so like a safety issue of like if you're too intoxicated to um, sit properly in a chair, then you don't need to be feeding your baby.
Right.
But it really depends on how much you've had to drink versus like how long you've waited and all of that. But pumping and dumping is not always necessary, and it
Mm.
also doesn't always work. So,
Really?
yes.
Okay. Because I was also thinking about like energy drinks or what
Yeah.
are some things that
Caffeine.
caffeine,
Yeah.
yeah, is
So caffeine is definitely one of those things. I mean, I have my caffeine every day. I cannot live
okay.
without caffeine. But that is one of those things that, of course, does transfer into breast milk, and we have things categorized on different types of levels. So a level 1 would be the safest level, and a level 5 would be the most hazardous. And so caffeine does fall in there, but in general amounts, like I would say 300 to 400 milligrams and below is safe,
Mhm.
but they really recommend like 200 milligrams a day is safe. But of course, you're going to look at things like I don't want to have it too late because then it'll pass into my breast milk and my baby won't want to sleep. So
Okay.
just everything in moderation, I will say.
Moderation.
Yes.
Okay.
Not only in breastfeeding, but just in life. Everything in
Yes.
moderation. Yes.
All balance.
Yes.
A lot of balance is here,
Yeah.
balancing with not being overstimulated, but
Mhm.
wanting to stimulate just enough to get the
Yeah.
the milk supply. Are there any other, because like that, I think that was one myth that I heard of,
Yeah.
no caffeine, no alcohol for
Yeah.
breastfeeding.
Yeah.
Are there any other myths about breastfeeding that we haven't covered that you're just like, I really need to get this out into the world?
There are so many myths, honestly. I can't think of any specific right now.
Mm.
I will say I have had a family member say that I was feeding my baby like half and half, or it wasn't, it's too much water that you're feeding your baby because you're breastfeeding. And I will say that your body adheres to the needs of your baby. And so don't listen to the people that are like, "Oh, is that the best thing?" And it's like, "Well, I mean, I can school you or you can just kind
Mhm.
of, keep your comments to yourself."
Mhm.
So, but yeah, there are so many myths out there and we're here to bust those. But yeah, if you all hear any myths and you want to ask, please drop it in the comments and I'd be more than happy to answer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Make a whole Q&A session,
Absolutely.
and be a bit funny too.
Yes.
So, stigmas and
Mhm.
myths, what about any benefits or maybe things that people really don't know? Because again, for me, I never thought about a lactation consultant being able to kind of guide a parent about, oh, like we see something going on.
Yeah.
That's so helpful. Like, I'm
Yeah.
literally thinking about how so many parents are probably pulling their hair out. Like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with my baby?
Mhm.
So is there anything else that you maybe like experience wise
Mhm.
where you've helped a parent lead them to something that helped with their baby?
So one of the things that just popped into my head that I wanted to mention is not only are we here for the infant feeding piece, but we're here for the maternal safety piece too. So in the hospital setting, there are times whenever moms are not feeling well.
Mm.
And I have had an instance where one of my patients started hemorrhaging while I was in the room. Very scary. And so that's also a role of a lactation consultant is to catch those first signs of not necessarily hemorrhaging, like not anything that serious, but asking in those postpartum visits, screening like the PHQ-9, screening for that postpartum depression or screening for how the weight gain is going for the baby, because a lot of times we might see them before they go back to see their pediatrician. And so we are definitely on the front lines of making those observations. And I think that that helps to make sure that we're catching those early.
Mm.
Yeah.
So with this too, so you talk about the maternal health, and I think the audience have gained a lot of knowledge not only for if they are choosing to get pregnant, but again, if they're in community with someone
Right.
who will be pregnant, who is pregnant, who just gave birth, to just have that knowledge to help and support them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you often speak also with the family, not
Mm-hmm.
only the mom or like the parent who's given birth, but the family of here's how you can support.
Oh,
Mhm.
absolutely. When I'm in a room, I try to involve everyone that wants to be involved. Sometimes there are families that are just like, okay, she can just go over there and hide behind a curtain.
Mm.
But a lot of times there are families and partners that want to be involved that are just itching to know what they can do to help. And so I really try to get everybody involved and I'll be like, "Okay, did you hear that? So and so like the support person," and
Mhm.
I'll ask them to kind of teach it back to me and they do a really good job of that. And so, yes, I want everyone to be involved, even the little siblings. Yeah, just
Oh.
giving them little jobs too helps.
I love that.
Yeah.
Um, well, this is kind of like an related, but a little off topic. I don't know if you have also been involved in how people who are breastfeeding or chest feeding, the resources they have at work.
Yeah.
I know that even at my place of employment, we do have those breastfeeding rooms.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely the map though, because that place is so big.
Oh, I
So when people
know.
tell me like, "Hey, where are the chest feed?" I'm like, actually, we have them.
Like, I can help you find it, but
We can go find it together."
yes.
So what gaps have you seen that you wish could happen in
Right.
workplaces?
So that's one of the things that we ask in our initial consult or before they are discharged from the hospital. Hey, are you going back to work or school? And if you
Mhm.
are, do you have a safe place to store your breast milk? Do you have a safe place to pump and wash your hands before pumping? And so um, I really like to stay up to date on like those laws because there's a breast pump act that's out that sometimes employers can get by because there are like little gray areas. Um, but a mom is entitled to a certain amount of time to breastfeed, or I'm sorry, to pump, and
Mhm.
then making sure that it's not in somewhere dirty like a bathroom or like a tiny little closet, making sure she can wash her hands and there's a place to store it as well.
Yeah.
So, yes, that is something that we address, and that's something that is always on my radar as a working mother.
Inclusivity, safe
Yeah,
places,
even
even
when traveling, yeah.
right. Like at the mall,
Yeah.
a lot of women just go to the bathroom
Mhm.
to pump, or when they are wanting to breastfeed their child, having to like wear a cover and like go somewhere
Yeah.
hidden as if it's this taboo thing.
I
And
still do that as a
yeah,
lactation consultant just because of the stigma.
the stigmas
Yeah,
of it all.
absolutely.
It shouldn't be so
It
taboo.
should not. I'm like, "Do you wanna eat in the bathroom? I don't."
Mhm.
So, but just making sure that, people I like to validate people, like, if you feel empowered to breastfeed in public and however you want to feed your baby, you go right ahead and you do it, and I'm going to support you and clap for you all the way. Um, but yeah, it's very much taboo still.
Very.
Yeah,
We talked about a lot
we
today. We've
did.
talked about the balancing of the overstimulation
Hmm.
versus the understimulation. We've talked about how, yes, you want to produce, your or increase your milk supply, but then there's also the other side where you wouldn't stop it,
Exactly.
wean it off. We've talked about how people can be involved, even if you're
Hmm.
not the pregnant person, even
Yeah.
if you're not the person who gave birth,
Hmm.
you can still be of support to them.
Absolutely.
And I feel like you should be supportive of them.
Yes, you should be
You
because
should be involved.
yes, it takes a village.
It
It
does.
truly takes a village.
And we've spoken about some myths as well, alcohol, caffeine as you're breastfeeding, maybe not wearing too constrictive clothing,
Hmm.
spoken about the differences,
Yeah.
women of color
Yeah.
versus our counterparts, and mainly that being the whole being heard.
Yes. Being heard.
No assumptions.
No assumptions.
Let people have all the options.
Hmm.
Let them be aware of all the options and then
Yeah.
support them
And
truly in that.
give them a safe space
Mhm.
because that is just so imminent in making sure that women of color feel heard is just giving them that space to share and that space to advocate for themselves.
Which is huge.
Absolutely.
Advocacy, saying, "Hey, something's wrong," and being
Yeah.
heard.
And them actually listening. So
And
just making sure, and that's one of the things that the A&T program was striving to do is making more lactation consultants or lactation professionals that look like us because people are going to be more receptive to someone that looks like them than their counterparts. And obviously for relatable reasons. So,
And I think also too culturally, like there are different things that I would say for myself as a Black woman, some of the things, some of the way we say things as well, our
yes.
mannerisms are taken
Yeah.
completely different
Oh, yeah.
from someone who isn't a part of that culture. And it
Yes.
could lead to a lot of miscommunication.
It
And
absolutely can.
that's why I am also an advocate for that representation because that matters. Like
Oh,
the cultural
absolutely.
differences matter.
Yeah. I worked with quite a few people out of my cohort from A&T at one of the local hospitals, and I think that they could all agree. We've definitely had more than one instance of like, oh, when you go into that room, she's mad and she's angry and she's
Mm,
this and she's that. We go in there and have
yeah.
the best time. So, yeah,
Wild that
yeah.
there are still those stereotypes
Hmm.
and those gaps in healthcare.
Yeah.
But we have people like you,
Yes.
thankfully, we're
Yeah.
closing that gap.
Yeah.
One person at a time.
One person at a time. Absolutely. And I look at my daughter and I'm like, my daughter is, of course, she is brown skin
Mhm.
but she has such beautiful brown skin. And I try to make sure that she knows that brown skin is not only beautiful, but that's the way you were made. And like even when she tries to she'll ask me like, mom, can I straighten my hair? Mom, can I wear my hair like you? I try to be cognizant of that and wear my hair curly more than anything. Like
Mm,
today, this is like the first time in months that I've worn my hair straight, just because I want to show my daughter that the way that she was made
mhm.
is beautiful. So
And because you don't see it.
no,
You don't see it. You don't have that representation, and it sends an indirect message
it does.
that who you are isn't beautiful.
Exactly.
It doesn't, people think, oh, it has to be this direct, someone telling you to your face,
No,
you're not beautiful. No,
it's the small things.
you can see it. You can read between the lines.
Yes.
And I talked about in my first episode, I was like,
Mhm.
I could read between those lines as a little dark skinned girl if I'm not seeing myself in front of those magazines.
Exactly. So we're just supposed to assume that we're not worthy of that.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's as it was designed.
Yes.
Um,
So, yes, we could go on and on about
I know
that
we
for a
could
long time.
really, really.
But
Uh,
yes.
and then finally, too, the main thing I really wanted to drive home was the benefits of having a lactation consultant. Because
Mhm.
I think people would assume, oh, they're just going to help me latch,
Right.
but it's so much
It's
deeper.
so much deeper. And not only just the lactation consultant, but just a whole birth team and postpartum team. So whether that's a doula and a lactation consultant, postpartum doula, midwife, whatever it is, just making sure that you know your options from the get go. The moment, my goal is that a birthing person knows from the moment that they're pregnant that they have options,
Mm.
whatever those options may be, and just making sure that they know that they can have a village and that it can be
Hmm.
accessible to them.
A village.
Yeah,
You don't have to do all of
you
this
don't have to do
alone.
it alone.
And I think it's even better to have those minds, those
Hmm.
different experts that have different knowledges in the room with you
Absolutely.
to help you become aware of the things that you may not know.
Hmm.
Because as we said in the beginning, every journey is different. So
Yep.
you never know, you never know what some of the challenges you might face that professional can
Hmm.
help guide you to some sort of resolution.
For sure. And there are support groups that I do want to mention before ending as well.
Of course.
So there's two support groups that come to mind with infant feeding and helping in the postpartum setting. So one is in Charlotte, and it's Queen City Cocoa Beans, and it's for women of color. And then Mahogany Milk is actually led by my program director from A&T, Danielle Williams, who is the goat of lactation in the triad. And yes, so it's called Mahogany Milk, and they have support groups also for women of color.
And we're going to put all of that in the
Yes.
description. I'll put all the resources that
Yeah.
anybody can have, the websites, the books, the people as well.
Oh, yes.
Where can people find you?
So I am on TikTok. I don't even remember my TikTok name. I
I'll put it
called
in the
you last
description.
time. Yeah, but I'm on Facebook as well,
Mm,
kind of on Instagram. But yes, we'll put all those links because I don't remember all of my usernames. But also, you can just, I mean, all of those places. But I mean, I'm just connected throughout the Triad area of North Carolina. So you can even email me too. So it's
mm.
irisdanielj@gmail.com, and I can lead you to whatever resource you need in regards to infant feeding and birth work, birth world stuff.
I love that. And then people reaching out to you, are you just right now in the hospital space, or do you offer any services for people who are looking for a lactation consultant?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I offer services through private pay or private practice. So I do offer that, and I do home visits, in person and virtual visits, but I can also connect you to someone who may be in your area. So I know quite a few lactation consultants throughout the area of North Carolina, like both far and wide. So
Well, Iris, we've talked so much about maternal health, lactation, and just providing those resources to the audience, allowing them to have a deeper understanding of what you do, what people in your role do, and how they can be of benefit
mhm.
to people who are birthing and who need that support.
Right.
So, my final question to you is, how does that make you feel?
I love this question
Mhm.
because, and honestly, I feel like I'm getting a little bit emotional.
It's okay.
But I just look back at my 19-year-old self and that little girl that was just scared. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how to be a mom. I didn't know how in the world I was going to get through college. And now I look at it and I'm like, wow, I'm in a place where I can help people that were just like me into a journey, like to create a journey that is more seamless for them and to make sure that they know their options and advocate for themselves throughout the whole process. So, how does that make me feel? It just makes me feel empowered
Mm.
and seen and validated and safe.
And safe.
Yeah.
And I feel it.
Yeah.
I can feel how much you love this work,
I love it.
which is why I had to have you on. And again, I'm so grateful that you spent your time to be here with us. Thank you
Absolutely.
so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
I will, of course, put all the details on how you can connect with Iris in the description. I hope you all found this as beneficial as I have. And if you have any questions, use the comment section. Iris will be there monitoring
Yeah.
to answer all of those questions. And like I said previously, let me know, how did you find out Santa Claus wasn't real? And
Yes,
how
I
did she
need to know.
react? And also, if you have a funny, my parents told me babies come from wherever, put that in the comment section as well. But until next time, please remember to be kind to yourself.